Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and thank you for coming tonight to support a cause which is really very much close to my heart. My name is Mashford and I was born with congenitally corrected transposition of the greater arteries, ventricular septal defect and pulmonary stenosis. I've had my chest open for reconstructive heart surgery 7 times, 3 pacemakers, 2 defibrillators, 1 stroke and countless other procedures, finally leading to my heart transplant at the Freeman Hospital just 18 months ago. I will quickly recount some of my most notable experiences. My condition as a child was actually diagnosed as just a simple VSD, or a little hole in the heart, as my surgeon described it to my parents. I didn't have any intervention at all until I was 8 years old, when I started to struggle at school and I was rather blue. It's a fairly standard operation, Mr. and Mrs. Mashford. We'll have him in and out within 4 hours, said the surgeon. 8 hours into the 4 hours, my parents were invited into the room of doom, where they were told of my complex condition, and that they did not believe that I would survive the operation, and certainly not the night. My parents were told the best thing you could do right now is get a priest, which they did. A further 8 hours into the surgery, and I returned into the recovery room, where I had the blessing of the sick and the last rites. I was in and out of a coma for 5 months. Then miraculously, I started to get better. I had a friend in hospital, in the ward. His side of the ward was blue for Everton. My side of the ward was red for Liverpool. Thank you. He'd had the operation that they'd planned for me, and he was well. He was the cheekiest, funniest guy I've ever met. And he became my best friend. Martin eventually went home, because he was well, and I was happy for him, but very sad at the same time, because I wanted to know what home felt like again. Some weeks later, I remember hearing my consultant, supposedly out of earshot from me, saying to my mum, "Did you realise, Mrs. Mashford, you may just be taking him home to have some final days with your family?" I neither understood or cared, because I'd been promised a puppy. It was a really bright, sunny day, and I was sat on the lawn of my parents' house. My little white puppy was asleep on my lap, and I watched the white aircraft until it was a tiny dot. It was silent, and then my mum broke the silence. She called out to me and she was upset. She told me something that I'll never forget, and it was the day I realised that heart disease kills people. My friend Martin had died. "Is that what's going to happen to me now, Mum?" I said. "No, son, it's not, because you're a fighter." And right then, age 9, I decided I'm going to fight heart disease. I took up karate and achieved my black belt, only to be forced to stop at the age of 17 after my second operation and the onset of heart failure. We're nearly ready for our main course, so I'll fast forward now to January 2012, though I really would be here all night. I was then told I was inoperable, but in end-stage heart failure, and I was referred for transplant assessment. By now I'd married my rock, Joe, and we'd had our 2 lovely sons, Josh and Liam. All my life I'd developed ways of hiding my heart disease. In heart failure, I would run the taps so my family couldn't hear me being sick in the morning. I started my own business, and I pretended to be busy at lunchtime so I didn't have to walk to the shop and get out of breath. I was listed for transplant immediately. I felt relief that I no longer had to hide how unwell I was, but my thoughts soon turned to how I was going to tell my boys Daddy needed a new heart. I wish some adults had the composure and innocence as they had, after avoiding the subject of somebody having to die to enable me to live. We broached the subject. Josh immediately said, "Well, that makes sense, Dad. They don't need it anymore." I went downhill and was given no more than 6 months to live. I was admitted to wait for a heart on the super urgent list after going into multiple organ failure, liver, kidneys, and of course heart. Being 342 miles from home was tough, but on May the 4th, 2013, I texted Joe and said I had a funny feeling about today. A couple of hours later, I went back onto the ward, with a nagging voice telling me to do so. I asked my nurse if anything was happening. She just said, "No, pet, I'd love to be the one to take you down. Half an hour later, she came back with the transplant coordinator. There was a potential match. A feeling of total peace and calm came over me like I could never explain. This was going to be the beginning of a new life. I got onto the operation table myself and greeted everybody. "May the 4th be with you," I said. And we laughed, and I prayed, and I went to sleep. My transplant was complicated. It took 14 hours. My heart had become so enlarged, it started to grow around my sternum. The minute I woke up, I knew I was stronger. I found out my donor had died in a cycling accident. 7 days after, I did 7 minutes on an exercise bike in memory of him. After 7 days. 19 weeks after, I did a 30-mile cycle sportif. 20 weeks after, I resumed karate again. A year later, I did the London to Brighton British Heart Foundation bike ride. 14 months later, we found my beautiful wife is pregnant with a baby that could never have been born. This July, I'm leading a team, my team, TeamMash, of 50 cyclists from Bristol to Newcastle, 342 miles. I've never felt better in my entire life. British Heart Foundation research helped change the world by pioneering heart transplant surgery. It was a British Heart Foundation Professor Donald Ross who carried out the UK's first heart transplant. And Professor Magda Jakob continued to drive forward successful transplantation techniques. Before the British Heart Foundation, babies born with congenital conditions like mine would only 1 out of every 5 would survive after their first birthday. Today, thanks to the advances in treatment and care that the British Heart Foundation helped to fund, 4 out of 5 grow up to be adults. Current research in the British Heart Foundation includes understanding what can go wrong in developing embryo's heart, and I'm delighted to say that our baby has been benefited from one of those scans, and there are no abnormalities. Thank you for supporting. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy the rest of the week.